We spend our entire lives terrified of being in the wrong place. We are taught from childhood that there is a specific script to follow, a ladder to climb, and a designated seat waiting for us at the table of success. We are told that if we study hard enough, work long enough, and follow the roles, we will eventually earn the right to sit with the kings and queens of this world. But the universe has a strange sense of humor. It rarely hides its greatest treasures in the places where they are supposed to be. It does not hide wisdom in the high towers of academia, nor does it hide courage in the glittering halls of royalty. Often, the most profound turning points in history begin with a mistake, a wrong turn, a missed train, or, in this case, a cheap, second-hand translator that malfunctioned at the exact wrong moment. We are conditioned to believe that heroes are born in golden cradles destined for greatness. But real heroes are usually just ordinary people who are too stubborn to quit when things break. They are the ones with dirt under their fingernails and grease in their fingerprints. They are the ones who look at a shattered world not as a tragedy, but as a repair job. This is the story of Ethan Cole, a man who owned exactly one suit and a toolbox full of wrenches. It is the story of how the most powerful empire in the galaxy was saved not by a diplomat or a general, but by a mechanic who accidentally sat at the wrong table. It serves as a powerful reminder to all of us, sometimes the wrong place is exactly where you are meant to be. And sometimes the person who saves you isn't the one with the crown, but the one who knows how to fix the chair you're sitting in. The air in Sector 4 always tasted like ozone and recycled hydraulic fluid. It was a thick, metallic taste that stuck to the back of your throat. But to Ethan Cole, it tasted like home. His workshop was a chaotic cathedral of scavenged parts, tangled wires, and half-resurrected engines. In the center of the room, under the harsh glare of a single work light, Ethan was wrestling with the heart of an old atmospheric miner, a fusion regulator that every other mechanic in the city had declared dead on arrival. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," Ethan muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a greasy hand. He tweaked the magnetic flow coupler just a fraction of a millimeter to the left. The machine groaned, stuttered, and then hummed to life, glowing with a soft, steady blue light. Ethan smiled. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. That was the story of his life, making things work when they had no business doing so. His victory was interrupted by a low, melodic chime. The ventilation fans whirred as a sleek, silver drone floated through the open bay door. It was pristine, hovering silently above the oil-stained concrete floor, looking like a diamond dropped in a mud puddle. It projected a hologram into the dusty air, a golden crest that Ethan recognized immediately. The Imperial citizen Ethan Cole. The drone's voice was smooth and synthetic. "You are hereby summoned to the Galactic Unity celebration at the Imperial Palace. Attendance is mandatory for all registered skilled laborers in this sector. Transport will arrive at 19 other hours. Formal attire required." The hologram vanished, leaving Ethan standing in the silence of his shop. He stared at the empty air, panic rising in his chest. It wasn't the fear of the Emperor that gripped him. It was the terrifying realization that he owned exactly one suit. It was a charcoal gray synthetic blend he had bought for his sister's wedding 5 years ago. It was tight in the shoulders then. It would be strangling him now. He rushed to the small sink in the corner of the shop, scrubbing his hands with heavy-duty industrial soap. He scrubbed until his skin was raw and red, but as always, faint dark lines of grease remained etched into his fingerprints. No matter how hard he tried to clean up, the work always stayed with him. He was a mechanic, and tonight he was going to walk into a room full of God. The grand dining hall of the Imperial Palace was designed to make you feel insignificant. The ceiling soared 300 meters overhead, a transparent crystalline dome that revealed the swirling nebula of the Valerian night sky. The floor was polished diamond, reflecting the light of 1,000 hovering luminaries that drifted like fireflies above the guests. Ethan felt like an intruder in a dream. He tugged at his collar, which was indeed trying to strangle him, and kept his head down. The room was a sea of elegance. There were the tall, shimmering Valerians with their skin like crushed pearls. There were the heavy-set Bronther ambassadors, draped in silk that cost more than Ethan's entire workshop. And then there was Ethan, a human in a cheap suit, who smelled faintly of machine oil and anxiety. He navigated through the crowd, murmuring apologies as he dodged flowing robes and trailing capes. A dignitary with 4 arms brushed past him, giving him a look of sheer disdain, as if Ethan were a smudge on the pristine architecture. Ethan kept his eyes on the small, cracked screen of his universal translator. It was an old model he'd picked up at a scrapyard, and it had been acting up for weeks. The screen flickered, the battery warning light pulsing red. Seating assignment, the device chirped, the text garbled by static. Table 17. Ethan squinted at the screen. The number flickered. 1717. He looked up. In the vast ocean of tables he saw a glowing holographic number floating above a table near the front of the hall. It looked surprisingly prominent for a mandatory guest from Sector 4, but Ethan didn't question it. He just wanted to sit down, eat whatever alien food was put in front of him, and get back to his fusion regulator. He walked toward the front, unaware that the glitching pixel on his screen was hiding a 3rd digit. He wasn't assigned to table 7777 by the kitchen doors. Table 17 was an island of calm in the chaotic sea of the banquet. It was set for 2, but only 1 seat was occupied. A young woman sat there. She was stunning in a way that made Ethan's breath hitch. Pale, luminous skin, and hair that cascaded like liquid silver. But it wasn't her beauty that caught Ethan's mechanic's eye. It was her chair. It was a massive, intricate throne of floating metal and pulsing circuits, hovering just inches off the floor. It wrapped around her fragile frame like a protective shell. Ethan hesitated, then pulled out the chair opposite her. The woman looked up. Her eyes were violet, large and filled with a profound, crushing loneliness. She looked surprised to see him, her gaze darting to his rough hands and ill-fitting suit. "Is this seat taken?" Ethan asked, his voice cracking slightly. The woman stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. "No, it is not." Ethan sat, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd been holding for an hour. The silence stretched between them, awkward and thick. Most men would have complimented her dress or asked about her lineage. Ethan did neither. He was looking at the suspension system of her chair. "That's a Mark IV grav suspension unit, isn't it?" Ethan asked, pointing a fork at the glowing emitter base of her throne. The woman blinked, startled. "I beg your pardon." "The chair," Ethan said, forgetting his anxiety as his professional curiosity took over. "I recognized the hum. It's a magnetic drive, right? Not hydraulic. Smoother ride, but a nightmare to calibrate if the dampeners go out." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed the woman's face. For the first time all evening, someone wasn't looking at her legs, or her face, or her title. He was looking at the machine keeping her upright. "It is magnetic," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "It drifts to the left sometimes." "I bet it does," Ethan grinned, leaning in. "That's a common flaw in the Mark IVs. The intake valve gets clogged with dust. If I had a 3mm wrench, I could fix that for you in 10 seconds. For the first time in years, the corners of Sarah's mouth twitched upward. She looked at this strange, greasy human who wanted to attack her throne with a wrench. "You are a mechanic?" she asked. "Guilty as charged," Ethan replied. "Ethan Cole, I fix things that are broken." "I am Sarah," she said quietly. She didn't offer a title. She didn't need to. For that brief moment she wasn't a princess, and he wasn't a peasant. They were just 2 people talking about a broken machine. The arrival of Emperor Valindris was not just an entrance, it was an atmospheric shift. The air in the grand dining hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. The murmurs of thousands of guests were instantly extinguished, replaced by a silence so absolute you could hear the hum of the ventilation systems 300 meters above. Ethan froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He watched as the Emperor moved through the hall. He was a terrifying figure towering over his guards, his robes weaving patterns of living light that shifted with his mood. His face was severe, carved from the same unyielding stone as the palace itself. He walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of a man who held the fate of 12-star systems in his hands. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He glanced at his translator again, tapping it frantically. The screen flickered, the static cleared for a split second, and the horror washed over him. The pixel that had been dead finally lit up. It didn't say table 7. It said table 777. Oh no, Ethan whispered, the color draining from his face. I'm at the high table. Before he could stand, before he could run, the Emperor stopped directly in front of them. His shadow fell over the table, cold and imposing. He looked at Ethan, a human in a cheap suit, smelling of grease, and then he looked at the woman in the floating chair. Daughter, the Emperor said, his voice deep and resonant, like grinding tectonic plates. Ethan stopped breathing. Daughter, he had been explaining hydraulics to the Imperial Princess. He had offered to take a wrench to the throne of the heir apparent. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the guards to drag him away. Father, Sarah replied, her voice steady. You have a companion, the Emperor observed, his burning gaze shifting back to Ethan. A human, is this a diplomat? Ethan opened his mouth to apologize, to beg for mercy, to explain the broken translator. But Sarah spoke first. He is a specialist, father, she lied smoothly, a small, mischievous smile playing on her lips. He was explaining the structural inefficiencies of the Mark IV suspension system. It was fascinating. The Emperor paused. He looked at his daughter. He saw the spark of life in her violet eyes, a spark that had been missing for years. Then he looked at Ethan. The terrifying severity of his face softened, just a fraction. Fascinating, the Emperor repeated, a dry amusement in his tone. Then you may stay, specialist. Do not bore her. Ethan slumped in his chair as the Emperor moved on. He was alive, but as he looked around, he realized the danger hadn't passed. The entire court was staring at him. He was no longer invisible. He was the anomaly at table 7. The dinner continued, but the tension in the room was brittle. Ethan tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash. Sarah, however, seemed lighter. They talked in hushed tones, ignoring the glares of the dignitary. You saved me, Ethan whispered. You made me smile, she replied simply. It was a fair trade. Suddenly, a harsh, chittering scream shattered the polite atmosphere. Near the center of the hall, Ambassador Churex of the Hive Worlds had risen to his full, terrifying height. He was an insectoid creature, all chitinous plates and twitching mandibles. He was waving his multiple arms wildly, screaming in a language that even the best translators struggled to parse. It was a diplomatic breakdown, a flash of PTSD or a perceived insult. Treachery, lies, Churex screeched, his voice rising to a sonic pitch that shattered the wine glasses on nearby tables. Panic erupted. Guests scrambled away, overturning tables. The royal guards rushed forward, weapons drawn, shouting orders. In the chaos, a stray blast from a guard's energy pike went wide. It sizzled through the air, missing the ambassador but striking the support chain of one of the massive luminaries hanging above the center of the room. The chain snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Ethan looked up. Time seemed to slow down. The luminary was a massive structure of solid crystal and gold, weighing at least half a ton. It was falling, and it was falling directly towards Sarah. Sarah looked up, her violet eyes widening in horror. She gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles turning white. She tried to engage the thrusters, to move, but the Mark IV suspension system was slow. It drifted, it lagged. She was trapped in her golden cage, unable to move out of the path of the falling guillotine. The guards were too far away. The Emperor was screaming her name, but he was on the other side of the hall. Ethan didn't think. He didn't calculate the odds. He didn't worry about protocol. The instinct that made him a great mechanic, the ability to see a failure before it happened, took over. He didn't run. He dove across the table, scattering plates and crystal goblets. He slammed into Sarah's heavy floating throne with his shoulder, putting every ounce of his body weight into the shove. Move, he roared. The chair groaned and lurched sideways, shoved violently out of the kill zone. Ethan hit the floor hard, covering his head, just as the luminary smashed into the ground where Sarah had been sitting, a split second earlier. Crash! The sound was deafening. Shards of crystal exploded outward like shrapnel. Dust and light filled the air, then silence returned. A heavy, shocked silence. Sarah was sprawled on the floor, her chair tipped over but intact, safe in the safe zone. She was gasping for air, unharmed. The Emperor's voice broke the silence as he rushed forward, his guards surrounding them. Sarah pushed herself up, looking frantically for Ethan. Ethan was slowly getting to his knees. His ears were ringing. He looked down at his arm. A shard of crystal sharp as a razor had sliced through his cheap suit jacket and into his forearm. Bright, crimson human blood was dripping onto the pristine white diamond floor. Drip, drip, drip. The Emperor He looked at the shattered chandelier, then at his daughter, and finally at the human mechanic bleeding on his floor. The royal healers rushed forward, but Ethan waved them off with his good hand. "I'm fine," Ethan winced, clutching his arm. "Just a scratch." "You saved her," the Emperor said, his voice trembling with an emotion that wasn't anger. "Why? You do not know us, you owe us nothing." Ethan looked at the Emperor, then at Sarah, who was looking at him with tears in her eyes. He shrugged, a simple rugged gesture. "Where I come from, Your Majesty," Ethan said, his voice rough but steady. "You don't stand by and watch a lady get crushed, it's just what you do." The Emperor stared at him. For centuries suitors had tried to impress him with wealth, with lineage, with poetry. But this human bleeding on his floor had impressed him with the one thing money couldn't buy: action. The next morning, Sector 4 woke up to a sound it had never heard before, the whisper-quiet hum of a royal transport landing in the middle of the slum. Ethan was in his workshop nursing a cup of synthetic coffee and trying to ignore the throbbing pain in his stitched-up arm. He hadn't slept. The adrenaline of the night before had faded, leaving behind a cold dread. He expected the Imperial Guard to kick down his door and arrest him for ruining the dinner. Instead, a transport that looked like a drop of liquid mercury hovered outside his bay doors. A guard in gold armor stepped out, flanked by two drones. "Citizen Cole," the guard said, his helmet retracting to reveal a stern face. "The princess requests your presence, immediately." Ethan looked at his grease-stained coveralls. "Do I have time to change?" "No," the guard said. Minutes later, Ethan found himself standing on a private balcony high in the palace spires. The morning sun was blinding, reflecting off the crystal walls. Sarah was there, sitting in a backup chair, looking out at the city. She turned when he arrived. She wasn't wearing her formal court gown. She wore a simple white tunic. She looked younger, softer, and tired. "You came," she said, relief washing over her face. "Your guard didn't give me much choice." Ethan smiled weakly, holding up his bandaged arm. "How are you holding up?" "I am fine," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Thanks to you, my father, he wanted to give you a medal. I told him you would probably prefer spare parts for your workshop." Ethan laughed. "You know me well already." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind whipping at their clothes. Then, Ethan asked the question that had been keeping him awake all night. It was dangerous, it was rude, but he was a mechanic, and he couldn't ignore a broken system. "Sarah," he said gently, "why can't you walk? Your people have ships that fold space. You have medical bays that regrow limbs in hours. Why are you in that chair?" Sarah's smile faded. She looked down at her legs, hidden beneath the fabric of her tunic. "My body rejects them," she whispered. "It is a genetic anomaly. My nervous system incompatible with biological regeneration. And any internal implant, any cybernetic fix, my body attacks it like a virus. It kills the graft, and it nearly kills me." "He is wasting your time, Imperial daughter." The voice was like oil slicked over. Ethan turned to see a tall Valerian striding onto the balcony. He wore robes of clinical white, and his face was sharp and haughty. This was High Healer Vex, the head of the Royal Medical Division. He looked at Ethan with open disgust. "This is the mechanic," Vex sneered. "The one who tackles furniture. He is the one who saved my life, Vex." Sarah snapped, her voice hard. "Something your guards failed to do." Vex waved a dismissive hand. "Brute force is a common trait among primitives, but asking him to understand biphasic neural rejection is like asking a rodent to pilot a starship." Vex turned to Ethan, looming over him. "We have tried everything human. We have grown nerves from her own stem cells. We have used nanites. Her biology is unique. It is tragic, but it is final. She will never walk. Do not give her false hope." Ethan looked at Vex. He saw the arrogance of a man who was so smart he had stopped thinking. Vex saw a tragedy. Ethan saw a design flaw. "You're thinking like a biologist," Ethan said calmly. Vex blinked. "Excuse me." "You're trying to fix the wire," Ethan explained, using his hands.
You're trying to fix the nerves inside, but the body keeps rejecting the fix. So, stop trying to go inside. Ethan grabbed a datapad from a nearby table and quickly sketched a diagram. If the door is locked, you don't keep banging on it. You build a window. You don't put the tech inside her, you put it outside. He turned the screen to Sarah, an external neural exoskeleton, a suit. It sits on top of your skin. It doesn't plug into your nerves, it reads the bioelectric field around your nerves. It's like armor. But instead of protecting you, it moves you. Vex laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. An exoskeleton, like a cargo loader. You want to strap the princess into a piece of industrial machinery. It would be clumsy, laggy. She would look like a puppet. Not if the sensors are sensitive enough, Ethan countered, his eyes locking with Vex's. And not if the mechanic is good enough. The wager, enough. The Emperor stepped out from the shadows of the archway. He had been listening. He looked at the sketch on the datapad, then at his daughter's face. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking at the floor. She was looking at the drawing with a hunger in her eye. Father, Sarah said, her voice trembling. I want to try. It is dangerous, Vex warned immediately. If the machine malfunctions, it could crush her bones. This man is a scavenger, not a bioengineer. The Emperor looked at Ethan. You hear the high healer. The risk is great. If you hurt her, if you cause her pain, there will be no mercy. Ethan swallowed hard. He looked at Sarah. He saw the trust in her eyes. He realized that for her the chair wasn't just a seat, it was a prison, and he held the key. I won't hurt her, Ethan said. But I need access. I need the royal labs. I need materials. Vex wouldn't let me touch in a million years. And I need him, he pointed at Vex, to stay out of my way. The Emperor nodded slowly. Very well, you have the royal labs. You have the resources of the Empire. He stepped closer to Ethan, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You have 1 month. Build your suit, mechanic. But know this, you are not fixing a sign. You are holding the heart of the Empire in your hands. Do not drop it. Ethan nodded. He grabbed his greasy, battered toolbox from the floor. He walked past the stunned high healer and the worried Emperor. He walked toward the pristine white doors of the royal laboratory. He was a grease monkey in a world of glass, but he had a job to do. The royal laboratory of Valerius was a place of blinding white light and silence. It smelled of antiseptic and ozone. Into this temple of science walked Ethan Cole, carrying a battered, oil-stained toolbox that looked like it had survived a war zone. The royal scientists, draped in pristine robes, watched him with open hostility. They were the finest minds in the galaxy, experts in bioengineering and quantum harmonics, and they were being led by a man who didn't know the difference between a neuron and a proton. This is ridiculous, one scientist muttered, as Ethan set his toolbox down on a multi-million credit holographic table. Clang. All right, Ethan said, ignoring them, let's get to work. I need a conductive alloy that mimics human skin elasticity, and I need coffee, real coffee, not that blue sludge you people drink. The first month was a war of attrition. Ethan wasn't just fighting the laws of physics, he was fighting a culture of perfectionism. The Valerians wanted to model everything in simulations, for weeks before building a single part. Ethan worked differently. He built, he broke, he fixed, he taught them the language of mechanics. When a million-credit spectral analyzer broke down, the scientists prepared to order a replacement that would take weeks to arrive. Ethan walked over, kicked the side of the casing, and tightened a loose screw with a butter knife from his lunch tray. The machine purred to life. The scientists stared at him as if he were a wizard. Machines have feelings, Ethan told them, wiping grease on his pants. You just have to know where to tickle them. But the real work happened at night. When the scientists went home, Sarah would come down from her tower. They would sit amidst the wires and servo motors, eating takeout food from the lower district. They talked about everything. Her fears of never being a good queen, his fears of never being anything more than a grease monkey. You realize, Sarah said one night, tracing the line of a copper wire with her finger, that if this fails, they will destroy you. If this fails, Ethan smiled, tired but genuine, I'll just fix it. That's what I do. The failure 30 days later, the Mark I prototype was ready. It was ugly, it was bulky, covered in exposed wires and hydraulic pistons. It looked less like royal armor and more like a construction droid, but the diagnostics were green. The Emperor was there. High Healer Vex stood in the corner, a smug smile plastered on his face. The air was thick with tension. "Ready?" Ethan asked, kneeling beside Sarah as he strapped her legs into the frame. "Ready," she whispered. Her hands were shaking. "Initiate sequence," Ethan commanded. The suit hummed, the servos whined. Sarah took a deep breath and focused on the intention of standing. The sensors read the bioelectric signal. The hydraulics engaged. Slowly, shakily, Sarah rose from her chair. She stood. For the first time in 20 years, she was upright. A gasp went through the room. I'm doing it," she laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, and then, disaster struck. A feedback loop shrieked through the room. The sensors, overwhelmed by the sudden spike in Sarah's adrenaline, misinterpreted the signal. The right leg locked up, the left leg buckled. "Abort," Ethan yelled, diving forward, but he was too late. Sarah crashed to the floor. The heavy metal frame slammed against the diamond tiles, with a sickening crunch. She cried out, not in pain, but in sheer crushing humiliation. "I told you," Vex's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "He is playing with forces he does not understand. He has broken her." Ethan scrambled to her side, frantically unbuckling the straps. "Sarah, are you hurt? Talk to me." Sarah pushed him away. She was weeping, her face buried in her hands. "It's over," she sobbed. "I'm broken. I will always be broken. Leave me alone." The guards moved to escort Ethan away. The Emperor looked disappointed. Vex looked triumphant. It was the lowest moment of Ethan's life. Ethan sat in the dark lab, alone. The Mark I suit lay in a heap in the corner, a pile of expensive trash. He replayed the data logs for the 100th time. The Valerian scientists had said the sensors were too slow. Vex had said the nervous system was incompatible. "No," Ethan muttered. "It wasn't too slow, it was too fast." He realized the problem. The Valerian sensors were military grade. They were designed for super soldiers, with perfect discipline. They were picking up Sarah's fear, her excitement, her doubt, and trying to translate all of it into movement. The suit hadn't failed because she was broken. It failed because she was human or Valerian equivalent. She was feeling too much. "It needs a filter," Ethan whispered. "It needs a dampener." He dug through his old battered toolbox. He pushed aside the laser cutters and the diamond drills. At the bottom he found it, a rusty beat-up inhibitor chip from an old mining droid he had fixed 10 years ago. It was a piece of junk worth maybe 5 credits. It was designed to stop mining droids from shaking when they drilled through granite. It was crude. It was dirty. It was perfect. He grabbed his soldering iron. He worked through the night, stripping the million-credit sensors out of the suit, and hot-wiring the rusty mining chip into the main processor. It was an insult to engineering. It was a Frankenstein creation. When the sun came up, the Mark II was ready. It didn't look sleek. It looked like a machine that had lived a hard life. But when Ethan turned it on, the hum wasn't a high-pitched whine. It was a low, steady thrum, like a heartbeat. He didn't call the Emperor. He didn't call Vex. He sent a message to Sarah. "Trust me one more time."
Sarah arrived at the lab alone. Her eyes were puffy from crying. She looked at the Mark II suit, then at Ethan. "Why are we doing this?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Vex was right. My body rejects the machine." "Vex is an idiot," Ethan said gently. "Your body didn't reject it. The machine was just too loud. I taught it how to whisper." He helped her into the suit. This time he didn't strap her in tight. He left it a little loose. He booted up the system. The rusty mining chip kicked in, filtering out the spikes of fear and adrenaline, smoothing the signal into a steady stream of intent. "Stand up, Sarah," Ethan said softly. She closed her eyes. She thought about standing. The suit didn't jerk. It didn't spasm. It rose, smooth as oil on glass. She opened her eyes. She was standing. She looked down at Ethan. For the first time, she wasn't looking up at him from a chair. She was looking him directly in the eye. "Hi," she whispered, a fresh set of tears forming. "Hi," Ethan smiled, his own eyes wet. Nice view from up there. I want to go outside, she said. I don't want to test it in a lab. I want to see the gardens. They snuck out through the service corridors, avoiding the guards. They reached the singing gardens, under the light of the 3 moons. This was the moment of truth. The singing gardens were bioengineered to respond to movement. They sang for the gardeners. They sang for the emperor. But they had never sung for Sarah, because she had never walked among them. She took a step, crunch. Her metal foot hit the gravel. A low, melodic note rose from the flower beds. She took another step. A harmony joined in. As she walked faster and answer, the garden came alive. The bioluminescent vines lit up in rhythm with her steps. The flowers chimed like bells. It was a symphony created by her own movement. She wasn't just walking, she was conducting an orchestra. She spun around, laughing, her arms wide. She stumbled slightly. A human error. But the suit caught her. Ethan caught her. They stood there in the moonlight, surrounded by singing flowers. His hands on her waist, the cold metal of the suit between them, but feeling non-existent. What am I to you, Ethan? She asked, breathless. Am I just a project? A machine to be fixed? Ethan looked at her. He wiped a smudge of grease from her cheek with his thumb. You're the only thing that makes sense in this entire galaxy, Sarah. He leaned in. She leaned in. And in the shadow of the palace, the mechanic kissed the princess. The next morning the emperor held court. High Healer Vex was giving a lecture on why the humans project was a failure and should be scrapped. The biology is simply too complex. Vex droned on. We must accept her fate. The heavy doors swung open. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of metal footsteps on diamond echoed through the hall. The court turned. Sarah walked in. She wasn't wearing robes to hide the suit. She wore the mechanical exoskeleton proudly, its servos whirring softly, the rusty mining chip doing its job perfectly. She walked with a natural fluid grace, head held high. She walked straight up to the desk. She didn't bow from a chair. She stood tall before her father. Father, she said, I am here to report for duty. The emperor stood up. His hands were trembling. He walked down the stairs, ignoring protocol, and embraced his daughter. Vex stood in the corner, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Ethan stood by the door, holding his toolbox, trying to fade into the background. But Sarah turned. Ethan Cole, she announced to the court. Come forward. He walked up. She took his hand. I wish to court this man, she declared. The court gasped. A human? A mechanic? The emperor looked at Ethan. He saw the grease on his hands. He saw the love in his daughter's eyes. You have restored my daughter, the emperor said. But to rule beside her you must be more than an inventor. You must be a leader. He issued a challenge. You have 1 year. Take your technology. Leave the palace. Go to the Rust Belt, the poorest sectors of our empire. Prove that this miracle isn't just for royalty. Heal my people. If you return in 1 year with a legacy worthy of a king, you shall have her hand. Ethan looked at Sarah. He squeezed her hand. I'll start packing, he said. He didn't take gold. He took crates of spare parts, scrap metal and his toolbox. He landed on Cora, the mining moon on the edge of the empire. It was a hellscape of red dust and broken machinery. The people there were forgotten, veterans of old wars with missing limbs. Miners crushed by rock falls, dragging themselves through the dust because they couldn't afford the bioregeneration treatments of the capital. When Ethan walked into the local cantina, they laughed at him. A human? Here to save that? I'm not here to save you, Ethan said, slamming a prosthetic leg onto the bar counter. I'm here to fix you. The first patient was a hulking Bronther miner named Krog. He had lost his legs in a cave-in 5 years ago. He sat in a hovercart, bitter and angry. What can you do for me, little man? Krog sneered. The healers say I'm scrap. The healers are wrong, Ethan said. He spent 3 days building Krog a pair of heavy-duty legs using the hydraulics from a decommissioned loader droid. They weren't pretty. They were scarred, loud and hissed when they moved. But when Krog stood up and punched a hole in the cantina wall to test his balance, he wept. He lifted Ethan onto his shoulders and paraded him through the colony. Word spread like wildfire. They didn't call him the mechanic anymore. They called him the toy maker. Ethan worked 18 hours a day. He built arms for children who had lost them in factory accidents. He built spines for veterans paralyzed in the border wars. He didn't use the expensive, delicate tech of the palace. He used the Ethan method. Rugged, durable, dirty tech that could survive a sandstorm. He created an army of the broken, made whole again by steel and grit. Every night, Ethan sat in his dusty hab unit and wrote to Sarah on a datapad. Dear Sarah, I fixed a kid's arm today. He used it to throw a rock at me. I think he likes me. It's dirty here, and the food is terrible. But the people, they have heart. I miss the singing gardens. I miss the quiet. Mostly I miss you. And Sarah wrote back. She told him how she was changing the laws of the capital. Inspired by his work, she was defunding the vanity projects and pouring money into public health care. She was ruling not from a throne, but from her feet, visiting the lower districts, walking among her people. They were changing the empire from two ends, her from the top, him from the bottom. 11 months passed. Ethan was exhausted. He was thinner, scarred, and covered in permanent grime. But he had healed 5,000 people. He was ready to come home. But back in the capital, High Healer Vex was watching. He saw the reports. He saw the hero worship. He saw the statues the miners were building of the human mechanic. And he realized that if Ethan returned, the old order of the elite was finished. Vex began to make plans. He couldn't stop the mechanic from coming back, but he could make sure the princess fell one last time. The day of the Grand Unity ceremony arrived. It was the deadline. The emperor had gathered the entire court to welcome Ethan back and to witness the final test of Sarah's mobility. The atmosphere was electric. Ships from a dozen systems were docked. The miners of Cora had sent a delegation, standing awkwardly in their rough clothes, next to the silken nobility. In the dressing chambers, Sarah was preparing. The Mark IV suit, sleek, gold-plated, and refined, was waiting for her. But she didn't see Vex slip into the room moments before she arrived. She didn't see him insert a micropulse disruptor into the spinal coupling of the suit. It was a tiny device designed to introduce a chaotic signal lag at the worst possible moment. Sarah stepped into the suit. It hummed perfectly. She felt ready. She felt powerful. She walked out to meet her future. The doors to the throne room opened. Ethan stood at the far end, looking tired but proud. He wore his old grey suit, cleaned and pressed, but his hands were scarred from a year of hard labor. Sarah began to walk down the long aisle toward him. The music swelled. The court watched in awe, but Ethan frowned. He squinted. He saw something no one else saw. A microscopic shudder in her left knee. A hitch in the servo wind that was off by a fraction of a decibel. Thump. Whir click. Thump. It wasn't right. The rhythm was wrong. Sarah felt it too. The suit suddenly jerked. Her balance wavered. Panic flashed in her eyes. The disruptor was kicking in. The signal was scrambling. She was going to fall in front of the entire galaxy. She was going to collapse, proving she was still broken. Vex smiled from the sidelines, but Ethan didn't gasp. He didn't wait. He dropped his ceremonial bag. He broke protocol. He sprinted down the aisle, sliding on his knees across the polished floor until he was right in front of her. Ethan, she gasped, teetering. It's seizing up. I can't move. I know, Ethan said, pulling out his multi-tool from his belt. Don't move. Trust me. He jammed the tool into the knee joint, ripping off the gold plating plate with a loud crack. The court screamed. He was destroying the royal armor. Trust me, he whispered again. He saw the disruptor chip. It was buried deep in the live circuitry. He didn't have time to disable it carefully. He didn't have insulation tools. He did the only thing a mechanic could do in a crisis. He used his own body. He grabbed the live wire that was feeding the interference and ripped it out with his bare hand, grounding the massive electrical charge through his own arm. Blue lightning arced up Ethan's arm. The smell of burning skin filled the air. Ethan screamed silently, his teeth clenched, his body shaking, as the voltage coursed through him. But he didn't let go. He held the ground until the disruptor chip fried. The circuit cleared. The suit stabilized. He fell back, gasping, clutching his smoking arm. He looked up at her, sweat pouring down his face. Walk, Sarah, he rasped. I've got you. Sarah took a step. The suit was perfect again. She looked down at Ethan, then at the crowd. He saved me, she declared, her voice ringing with fury. Ethan stood up, swaying slightly. He held up the charred remains of the disruptor chip. Someone didn't want her to make it, Ethan announced, his voice echoing in the silence. He turned to Vex. This is a level 5 disruptor, only issued to royal medical staff. The Emperor stood up. His face was a mask of fury. Vex turned pale. He tried to run, but Krog, the Bronda miner with the iron legs, stepped in his path, crossing his massive metal arms. Going somewhere, little man, Krog growled. The guards dragged Vex away. The sabotage had failed. Ethan hadn't just built the machine,
He had become part of it to save her. That evening the chaos had settled. The healers had treated Ethan's arm, another scar to add to the collection. He stood with Sarah in the center of the singing gardens, the bioluminescent flowers casting a soft glow on their faces. "You have a bad habit of bleeding for me," Sarah said softly, touching his bandages. "I have a bad habit of fixing things," Ethan corrected. "Sometimes but it's always worth it." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a diamond. He didn't pull out a royal crest. He pulled out a small simple ring. It was made of polished steel, cut from the scrap metal of the very first Mark I prototype, the one that had failed. "I didn't want to give you gold," Ethan said, holding it up to the moonlight. "Gold is soft, it bends, it's pretty, but it doesn't hold anything up. This is steel. It's the same stuff we use to make you walk. It's strong, it lasts." He knelt. "Sarah, I'm just a mechanic. I don't know how to be a king. I don't know court protocol, but I know how to keep things running. I know how to build a life that doesn't break. Will you build one with me?" Sarah laughed, the sound making the flowers around them bloom in a riot of color. "Yes, Ethan, 1,000 times. Yeah." The wedding was unlike anything Valerius had ever seen. One side of the aisle was filled with glittering nobility, adorned in silk and light, holding delicate crystal staff. The other side was filled with miners, mechanics and soldiers, with metal limbs, wearing their work clothes and holding wrenches as if they were scepters. It was a clash of worlds that somehow made a perfect picture. Ethan stood at the altar in his best suit, this time one that actually fit. Sarah walked down the aisle, not just on her own feet, but dancing slightly to the rhythm of the garden song. When they kissed, the crowd didn't just clap, they stomped. The sound of metal feet and crystal staffs hitting the floor in unison shook the palace foundation. It was the sound of a new era, an era where biology and technology, royalty and labor, were no longer enemies. 40 years later, the Valerian Empire was unrecognizable. The strict class divides were gone. Hospitals were filled with mechanical limbs and biosuits. No one was left behind because they were broken. Ethan and Sarah sat on a bench in the gardens. Ethan's hair was white, and his hands were gnarled with arthritis, but they were still strong. Sarah's exoskeleton had been upgraded a dozen times, streamlined until it was invisible beneath her clothes. They watched their grandchildren playing near the fountain. One of the kids, a boy, had broken his toy drone. He ran over to Ethan, tears in his eyes. "Grandpa, it's broken. It won't fly." Ethan smiled. He pulled a small worn screwdriver from his pocket. He still carried it everywhere. He popped the casing, tightened a loose wire, and spun the rotor. "Nothing is ever truly broken, kiddo," Ethan said, handing it back. "It's just waiting for the right pair of hands." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" "That night," she said. "The drone, the invite, the glitch. You were supposed to be at table 777 by the kitchen. You were supposed to be invisible. You could have lived a quiet life." Ethan looked at the palace towers, then at the happy, thriving empire they had built together. He looked at the woman he had loved for a lifetime. "Sarah," he said softly, "I didn't sit at the wrong table. For the first time in the history of the universe, the glitch got it exactly right." And that is the story of how a poor mechanic fixed a broken empire. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest miracles aren't born in laboratories or throne rooms. They are born in garage workshops, fueled by coffee and stubbornness. They are born when we stop looking at people as broken things, to be discarded, and start seeing them as puzzles waiting to be solved. So the next time you feel like you're in the wrong place, or that you don't belong at the table, remember Ethan Cole. Pull up a chair, ask a question. You might just change the galaxy.